Stories and Reactions of Famous Atomic Spies, produced by Noah Gibson, May 25th, 2013. Claus Fuchs. He attempted to become a British citizen in 1939, but England entered World War II against Germany. Fuchs was then arrested as a suspected German agent. He was sent to an internment camp in Canada. He became extremely angry and resentful of his treatment by the British and was contacted by Soviet agents. He was released from the internment camp based in part on his noted anti-Nazi statements. Based on his background and capabilities in physics, he was able to be recruited back to England to work on the joint effort between England and the United States to create the atomic bomb. Pictures of Claus Fuchs. Claus Fuchs becomes a spy, the Tubeloids Project. After obtaining security clearance, he worked with Professor Rudolf Perls in an endeavor called the Tubeloids Project. Rudolf Perls had a major role in Britain's nuclear program. The USSR got details on British initial research from Claus Fuchs. He felt that the Soviet Union should have access to the same research, being an ally with Britain and the United States. He developed a contact with the Soviet embassy in London and agreed to pass along information. Here is an FBI file on Claus Fuchs. In May 1941, when he accepted employment as a scientist of atomic research, he decided to furnish information regarding this research to the Soviet Union, and in order to carry out this plan, in the latter part of 1941. Rudolf Perls. In 1940, Perls wrote a paper that explained how a uranium fission bomb could become a weapon that could win World War II. The 3-page paper estimated that the energy released in a nuclear chain reaction and how one could devise an atomic bomb from a small amount of fissible uranium-235. The paper sparked the interest of British and American authorities, which would eventually lead to the Manhattan Project. Here is an example of a chain reaction. A neutron is about to hit the nucleus of a uranium atom. The uranium nucleus splits fissions into several smaller atoms, releasing heat and several more neutrons. The chain reactions begin. Those neutrons hit other nuclei, causing them to fission and so on. Los Alamos, New Mexico. In 1943, Claus Fuchs was sent to the United States to work on the atomic bomb project at Los Alamos, New Mexico. Claus Fuchs acquired a thorough knowledge of the theory and design of the bomb, and passed his knowledge on to the Soviets. Fuchs' espionage is credited with saving the Soviets at least 1 year's work in their own program to develop the atomic bomb. Harry Gold. Gold was born in Bern, Switzerland in 1910. He was brought to America by his parents to settle in the old Jewish area of South Philadelphia. He grew up reading many books and attended Penn State to study chemistry. After leaving school, Gold worked for the Pennsylvania Sugar Company as a laboratory assistant. Harry Gold. Tom Black. Tom Black, who helped him attain the job, tried to get Harry Gold to join the Communist Party. Gold refused to join. However, he agreed to help the struggling Russian people to get their economy moving by providing trade secrets from the sugar company. He was just trading in techniques for manufacturing alcohol. It seemed relatively minor to Gold. However, this would lead to a 15-year career of passing on industrial and military secrets. In 1935, Gold began to steal industrial formulas from the Pennsylvania Sugar Company. Theodore Hall. From an early age, he had displayed an astonishing talent for mathematics and physics. In 1940, age 14, he had achieved some of the highest marks ever recorded in the entrance examination at Columbia University, but he was told that he was too young to enroll. He decided to go to Harvard, and he graduated at the age of 18. Only a few months later, he was the head of a team involved in designing the implosion trigger for one of the experimental bombs. While on a vacation in his hometown, New York, he entered the Soviet consulate and volunteered to pass information on the Manhattan Project, the race for the atomic bomb, to the Soviet government. Here is an FBI file on Theodore Hall. A talented physicist, he was taken on for government work and conducted work in the Steel Founders Union. Seville Sachs. Sachs, who went by the cover name Oldster, was the initial connection with Theodore Hall, and periodically traveled to New York to accept more materials from Hall until the war's end. After the war, Hall went on to get a doctorate in physics from the University of Chicago. Seville Sachs took a job for cancer research in New York, moving with his wife to New England 10 years later. Julius Rosenberg. He was born in 1918 in New York to Jewish immigrants from Russia, and his parents wanted him to become a rabbi. He attended City College of New York with a degree in electrical engineering. He became a member of the Communist Party while at school. He married Ethel Greenglass in 1939. He began working for the United States Signal Corps in 1940 as a civilian employee. The United States Army Signal Corps develops, tests, provides, and manages communications for the armed forces. He copied and passed important information on plutonium along to the Soviet Union, helping Klaus Fuchs develop the technique of implosion. Anatoly Yatskov. He carried out critical operations on the acquisition of information on the Manhattan Project. This information allowed Soviet scientists to obtain the highly useful data about the building of the facilities for production of weapons-grade uranium and plutonium, and also directly on the production of the atomic bomb. He also was one of the handlers of Julius Rosenberg. He helped smuggle data into Russia. David Greenglass. His older sister was Ethel Rosenberg. He joined the U.S. Army in 1943, a machinist at the Army base in Jackson, Mississippi. Greenglass was promoted to sergeant and assigned to the secret Manhattan Project. He was first stationed at the massive uranium enrichment facility at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and later worked at Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. He once laughed and told a jury that he slept through the U.S. atomic bomb test Trinity southeast of New Mexico. Morton Sobel. In 1951, Morton Sobel was tried and convicted with Julius and Ethel Rosenberg on espionage charges. He served more than 18 years in Alcatraz and other federal prisons, and he maintained his innocence until September of 2008. He admitted that as an electrical engineer, he turned over military and industrial information. Interview. I interviewed my father for his opinions on the sentencing of Klaus Fuchs, Harry Gold, and the Rosenbergs. These cases occurred in the 1940s and early 1950s, so he was not alive. However, this case is still widely debated today. Interview. In January of 1950, Klaus Fuchs confessed that he was a spy and was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment, along with the removal of his British citizenship. Do you believe that this is a justified consequence for his actions?
Absolutely not. After his sentence, he became the deputy director of Institute in Nuclear Research in East Germany. At that time, East Germany was a satellite state of the Soviet Union. He continued his communist actions, and he should have been sentenced to life imprisonment.
Klaus Fuchs actually had prolonged contact with Harry Gold, one of the American communist spies who served as a courier, transferring plans and papers from Fuchs to a Soviet representative. Gold is to this day seen primarily as a messenger serving as a go-between the spies and Soviets. Do you believe that Harry Gold was less important in the Soviets' ability to copy the atomic bomb than Klaus Fuchs?
Gold and Claus were both sentenced to equal jail terms, 14 years since they confessed, though I believe that Claus was more instrumental and Harry Gold only had to take papers to give them back to Annabelle Yakelville. After receiving them from Claus in New York, Harry Gold did not go through 1,000 tedious explosion tests like Claus.
The Times-Picayune newspaper from New Orleans, Louisiana on March 7, 1951. It includes information leading up to the trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, as well as Morton Sobel. The newspaper states, all our New Yorkers may seek death. Government attorneys have indicated they will seek the death penalty. The Rosenbergs were executed on June 19, 1953. Do you think that more spies should have been put to death for their actions?
I believe that it was justified to put Julius Rosenberg to death because Morton Sobel said that the classified military-industrial information Julius handed over to the Soviets was indeed what American government described as secret to the atomic bomb. I also believe that it was justified to sentence Ethel Rosenberg to death because she almost certainly was aware of her husband's actions and supported them entirely. Morton Sobel said she knew what he was doing.
A forum about the Rosenberg case. Robert Meeropol, Rosenberg's son. I will now show you a left forum that was published by www.rfc.org. Its main speaker is Robert Meeropol, the son of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. His parents were executed at the height of the McCarthy era when Robert was 6 years old. In the spring of 2010, Robert was the main speaker in a New York City forum trying to prove his parents' innocence. The Rosenbergs' grand jury testimony was released in September of 2008 on court order. His goal is to release David Greenglass's testimony in the near future.
To reopen the Rosenberg case. Well, it's a great crowd here. Perhaps we need a bigger room, and hello to all new friends and old friends and friends from as far away as Heidelberg, Germany. Anyway, in the mid-1970s, when I first said in public that we, through the reopening effort, were going to blow the lid off the Rosenberg case, Mort said to me, he responded, we already had blown the lid off the Rosenberg case with the release of Exhibit 8. The release of Exhibit 8, which the government said gave away the secret of the atomic bomb, showed that the core of the government's case was a fraud. And this, by the way, and it's one good thing about a small room, as you can all see it, this is Exhibit 8. This is the secret of the atomic bomb. Now, whether David Greenglass gave this sketch to the USSR or was forced to draw it by government prosecutors prior to the trial, it is not the secret of the atomic bomb. And that is what Mort and my parents felt the case against them was all about. They were right. That's why there was a death sentence, and that's why we're still talking about the case today. This fraud is why they could deny their guilt. They didn't do it. This is why they could write to me and my brother, my parents could write, quote, always remember that we were innocent and could not wrong our conscience. They were innocent of stealing the secret of the atomic bomb. And I agree that the secret of the atomic bomb is the key fraud in the government's case. And so Bell's admission does nothing to lessen that fraud. And as my brother said, if you read my book, you know I've considered this a real possibility since the 1980s. So what Mort said was not a big traumatic revelation for me, but the grand jury transcripts revealed quite a bit. Now, I've read all 1,000+ pages, and by the way, if anybody wants to follow along and read those pages themselves, there's some yellow cards up here that you can pick up, and they give you web addresses. I've read those 1,000 pages, and when they were released, the newspapers focused on the fact that Ruth Greenglass, in her grand jury testimony, said absolutely nothing about my mother being present and typing up the notes that accompanied Exhibit 8 that I showed you before. Now, since that was practically the only evidence against my mother, that was a big deal. But the reality is having worked through the Freedom of Information Act for many years, enforcing the release of a lot of material, we really already knew that. This just proved what we knew. But now even the mainstream media began to admit that perhaps there really was no case against Ethel Rosenberg. Now that's a big deal. But other, I think even more important stuff about the grand jury proceedings were not talked about by the press. And one of them is the fact that not only does Ruth Greenglass not mention my mother's presence at the supposed meeting where the secret of the atomic bomb was transmitted, she doesn't mention Exhibit 8 at all. It's like Exhibit 8 didn't exist. And that's why getting David Greenglass's testimony released as well, because it's still secret, is very important. Because if it turns out that neither of them talk about Exhibit 8, it raises the possibility that this whole secret of the atomic bomb was tacked on by the government after the grand jury proceedings, or was concocted by the Greenglasses to save their necks. But the reality is, these developments reinforce the key lessons about the Rosenberg case that we already knew. The U.S. government abused its power in truly dangerous ways that are still very relevant today. Those in power who were involved in my parents' case helped to fuel anti-communist hysteria and then capitalized on that political climate by targeting my parents and making them the focus of the Cold War era fear and anger. They manufactured testimony and evidence. They arrested Ethel as leverage to get Julius to cooperate with the prosecution, and then used their ultimate weapon, the threat of death, to try to extort a confession from my parents, and then force them to name others and testify against them. And then they created the myth of a key secret of the atomic bomb, then devised a strategy to make it appear that Julius had sought out and passed that secret, and then executed Julius when he refused to cooperate, despite knowing that the secret used to justify the death penalty was a prosecution-created fallacy. And then they executed my mother when she refused to cooperate, despite knowing that she wasn't guilty of the charges and was not an active participant in any espionage activity. All of this is true, even if every word of Venona is true, and despite anything that Mort said in 2008.